The prairie at dusk carried silence that felt heavier than gunfire. Elias Boone rode slow across the horizon, his horse's hooves crunching the brittle grass, the twilight sky pouring lavender and blood red across the land. He was a man of shadows, so the town whispered, half alive since his wife had gone to the grave. Every night the plains seemed to stretch farther, emptier, like they meant to swallow him whole. He had grown used to the ache, used to the quiet, until that evening when he saw her. She lay half buried in dust, arrows jutting from her body like cruel branches. Her hair was tangled with dirt, her lips cracked, her skin fever-bright under the last rays of the sun. Elias dropped from his saddle before thought could catch him. He knelt, his heart hammering like he'd stepped into a memory he wasn't ready for. Her eyes opened the smallest bit, black pools of pain and pleading, and she breathed the words that would lodge in him forever. Please don't pull the arrow. His hand froze midair. He had known death up close, had seen the way blood drained and bodies turned still. And yet something in her voice, fragile, yet stubborn as a cactus blooming against the odds, anchored him. He wanted to turn away, to ride on, to tell himself this wasn't his burden. But he couldn't. He lifted her carefully, his arms trembling under the weight of both her body and the choice he had made. Her name was Maribel Cruz, though he did not know it yet. He only knew she was a daughter of the Mexican trader who passed through town once a month, a family half-shunned by the white folk who muttered that their blood was not fit to mix. Elias was no stranger to rejection. Ever since his wife died, the town had looked at him like a man cursed. Too quiet, too strange, too hollow. Maybe that's why his hands did not falter as he laid her across his horse and whispered to himself, "Hold on, just hold on," though it was as much a prayer for himself as for her. The ride home felt longer than any trail he'd taken. Her weight pressed against him, each shallow breath pulling him deeper into her fight for life. When he reached his cabin, he carried her inside, brushing aside dust that had long settled thick on the furniture. He had not brought anyone into this home since the day the undertaker took his wife's body away. Now another woman lay on his bed, the walls heavy with ghosts. He lit the lamp, the golden glow spilling across her face, and the sight of her wound twisted his gut. The arrow shaft quivered with each shallow rise of her chest. His hands shook as he reached for water, cloth, anything to keep her alive. He thought of the doctor who once failed to save his wife and felt the same uselessness claw at him. Yet he pressed cloth to her skin, whispered soft reassurances she could barely hear, his voice breaking where hers had. Maribel fought the fever and the shame of being in his care. When her eyes flickered open, she murmured apologies, afraid of being a burden. Elias only hushed her, though part of him feared she would see the doubt that haunted his own heart. Their bond grew in silence, in the way she endured his clumsy care, in the way his grief softened when he heard her breathing steady at night. The arrow remained, a cruel reminder not just of her wound, but of a fear that bound him, the fear of touching what might break beyond repair. When supplies ran low, Elias rode into town. He walked into the general store with his list, but he could feel eyes on his back. Silas Crow, who once worked Elias's land before gossip swallowed him, leaned against the counter and smirked. "Heard you're harboring a trader's girl. Folks say Boone's got strange company these days." The preacher, Alden Graves, approached outside the store, his face long as judgment. "Sin clings to the weak-hearted, Boone. Don't let pity undo your soul." Elias said nothing. His silence was an old armor, but this time it felt heavier than lead. When he returned, Maribel saw the slump of his shoulders, the silence that clung like a second skin. She touched his arm lightly, her voice weak but steady. "You risked yourself for me. Don't let their words undo what's good." He brushed her thanks aside, but inside, the warmth of being seen, truly seen, flickered in him for the first time in years. Days blurred. He found himself cooking for two, patching blankets, mending her torn dress. She, though weak, began to hum while peeling potatoes, soft Spanish songs that filled the silence with a music his home had never known. And still, the arrow haunted them both. The wound festered. He watched her skin pale, her eyes glaze with fever. The choice gnawed at him. to pull it, risking her life in a moment of blood and pain, or to leave it and watch her fade away night by night. One night, lantern light pooled around them as the wind moaned through the cabin walls. He spoke words he hadn't dared let out since burying his wife. "I couldn't save her," he said, his voice cracking like brittle wood. "What if I fail you too?" Maribel's hand, fragile but steady, reached for his. "Failure is not in the trying," she whispered. "Only in the leaving." The words landed in him like water on desert stone, seeping into cracks he thought long dry. For the first time, his shame loosened its grip. He met her gaze, and something wordless passed between them, a promise made without speech. But the fever worsened. One dawn, her skin burned hot as fire, sweat soaking the sheets. She looked at him with eyes half shut, repeating her first plea. "Please don't pull the arrow." Yet Elias saw death crouch close, waiting. His hands trembled as he gripped the shaft, his lips forming a prayer he hadn't spoken in years. With one desperate motion, he pulled. The sound split the room, her scream, the gush of blood, his own heart pounding like a drum of doom. For a frozen moment, he believed he had killed her. His blood ran cold, dread flooding his chest like ice water. But then a gasp, a ragged breath. She still lived. Barely, but she lived. He pressed cloth to her wound, his own tears spilling, whispering thanks to a God who might yet be listening. Days later, the fever broke. She sat upright near the fire, pale but with color returning to her cheeks, her lips shaping a smile that steadied him more than whiskey ever had. Elias kept the fire stoked, his hands busy, but inside he felt something had been pulled free of him too. The arrow of grief, of shame, of loneliness too long lodged in his soul. And so the cabin that had been a tomb of silence now breathed with two voices, two lives bound by wounds and the courage to face them. Elias understood something then, as he looked at Maribel and saw not just the scars but the strength within them both. Sometimes the wounds we fear to touch are the ones that save us. Sometimes grace lives in the trembling hand that dares to try. And maybe, just maybe, the plains were not so empty after all.